Okay, now we get to the point where we get to do edits on our photos. And when you're editing your photo, it is important for you to know what the problem is with your photo. Um, so the three most common problem usually that we have in photographs is number one, the exposure is either too bright or too dark. Uh, this photo is obviously a little bit too dark. And the second one is that the color temperature or the white balance is incorrect. And how you can tell that you have a white balance issue is that your photo has colors that look weird. So, for example, the wall here is too white. I mean, too green, and there's also a lot of yellowish kind of cast if you see the net here, and also in this area. Um, the third one, which is related to taking a photo that is too dark, is the problem with grain and noise. Now, I would say grain and noise for me is okay. If you have a good photo that has really good action and you have um, good exposure, even if you have grain, it is still a good photo. However, we do want to minimize it as much as possible, to the point where the grain does not distract from the good photograph. So in this video, we're going to talk about fixing problem number 1 and number 2, and we'll worry about grain and noise in a different video. Now, the program that you will use is called Polarr. So if you click on the Windows button here, and you can search for Polarr, yours will not say Photo Editor Pro. Yours would say Photo Editor Polarr, just because we don't have the Pro version for the Computer Lab computers. So click on it. Also, if you want to use this program at home, you can. It is a Google Chrome extension. So if you need help trying to get it, let me or Mr. Smith know. So when you're in Polarr, if you don't have any photos saved on there, you can go ahead and select your photos and drag it in. And here are your 2 photos that you selected or that you opened. This right here, you can click on this and remove the photo. You can either remove a selected photo or remove all of your photos when you're done with editing. This is the adjustment sliders. And if you don't have it on yours, you have to click on this knob right here. This has tutorials about the different features of Polarr. You can do that on your own time if you want to. This we probably won't use. These are the different masks. Crop. Generally, you don't want to crop. If you're doing it for yearbook, you don't want to crop your photos in the editing process, because you can do that in design, and so having a photo that's not cropped will give you a little bit more freedom on how to frame your photo in design. This is also not useful to you right now. Okay, so going to the adjustment sliders, we are going to look at light first, and the light is where you can fix the exposure problem of your photo. Okay, so you have exposure and brightness. They both do kind of similar things, and that is making the photo overall more dark or more dark or more bright. But I usually prefer using exposure just because it's a little bit tamer. As you can see, if I move this all the way down, it doesn't turn the photo all black. So I don't usually use the brightness slider. The contrast slider right here, it changes the contrast between the between the brighter value with the darker value. So as I increase the contrast, you can see how the dark wall here becomes darker, and so it blends in with her uniform. If you turn the contrast down, then as you see less contrast in the photo, then you can see how the dark wall becomes a little bit less dark. And so yeah, play around with the contrast. Be careful not to get it too high, because then the photo looks fake because of how it affects the colors in the photo. Also, if you turn the contrast too low, sometimes you can make the photo a little less sharp, and you don't want to get it too low either. Okay, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, they all also affect the exposure of the photo. The highlights and the whites, they added the value of the brighter parts of the photo. Highlights usually affects the brightest parts of the photo, whereas whites affects the bright parts of the video. And this is, you kind of have to do it by trial and error, and you're just gonna have to play with it. Oh, interesting tip. If you mess around with these sliders and you want to bring it back to 0, all you have to do is double click on the slide and it'll go back to 0. Okay, shadows and blacks is, this affects kind of the darker parts of the photo. The shadows changes the dark values of the photo, whereas blacks changes the even darker values in the photo. So yeah, if you have exposure problems, you want to play around with the light section of this. Because this photo was a little dark to begin with, then you'll have problem with grain here as you increase the exposure. And I'm not going to talk about that in this video, but just be aware as you edit your photo. The next one is the color balance problem. So in most editing programs, you will see a place where you can change the color temperature, and they would usually have these two sliders. That is the blue and yellow temperature, and then the green and what is this, purple-ish tint. And what you have to do is you kind of play around with this until you see that your photo looks okay. So I can see that my wall is looking kind of green here, so I have to move the slider away from the green until I get the color that I want. Okay, right here, that it looks kind of right. And the easiest way for you to gauge whether the color looks right is by looking at parts of the picture that are supposed to be gray or white. If you change the color and the whites look kind of white and the grays look kind of gray, then you're pretty close to getting it down. I also said earlier we have a problem with a yellow tint or yellow temperature, so I have to move this away from yellow into the blue territory just a little bit. Okay, then I think I have what I want. The vibrance and saturation, they both do similar things. That is, they make the colors punchier. and make the color more vivid. Um, the difference between the vibrance and the saturation, though, is that saturation, they treat all of the colors the same, and so they make it more vivid all at once. Whereas the vibrance, they try to increase the vividness of the colors without affecting skin color as much. So, okay, sorry, Abby, but if you increase the saturation here, you can see that her face is becoming more orange. Whereas if you use the vibrance slider, while it also becomes more vivid, but it does it in a more gradual way and not as intense as if you use saturation. Okay, so what about all these other sliders? The detail slider, clarity, kind of, it adds contrast to the edges of the picture. So as you increase the clarity slider, it makes the photo punchier. This can help with photos that are not sharp to kind of give an illusion that it's a sharp photo. You do not want to go overboard with this because it'll make your photo look fake. You can also use the sharpen slider to make your photo a little bit more sharp. And what the sharpen slider does is it adds more grain to the photo so that it seems like it's more sharp. So you have to be careful also when you use this slider. A vignette is that kind of darkened edges that some people like to add for the purpose of the yearbook. You don't need it. You don't want it. HSL is where you can treat the colors independently. Say I want my greens to be a little bit more saturated. So watch this line over here. As I add the saturation of the green, then that line becomes more vivid. The luminance changes how dark or how bright that line is or the greens are. And the hue is where you change the value of the greens. So if you change the hue or you change the hue up or down, then that anything in the photo that's green will change into either blue or red depending on where your slider is. So once you finish editing your photos and you want to keep this editing, then you can click on this icon. This is where you save your photos. You want JPEG format best, and you can change the name if you want, but you can also, if you only want to save one photo, then you can say save copy, and what that makes is it's going to make a copy of the photo. It will not save and overwrite your original photo. It'll make a new photo. But you can also batch save, which also will create a new photo or create new photos, but then you don't have to save them all individually. Now when you save a photo using the batch save, it won't change the naming of your photo. So if you're looking for a photo in that folder, then you can look for the same the same name, and when you open it, it'll have the editing that you made.